Danger. The Attorney General is maneuvering to blow up Aldama's deal with anti-corruption prosecutors and thus save Pedro Sánchez. Let's begin. Hello everyone and welcome to a new edition of Medidas Cautelares. Very concerning information which we are going to reveal exclusively here on Medidas Cautelares. As always, exclusively, because many of you tell me, man, why do you always say it's exclusive? Well, if we're the only ones sharing it, then it's exclusive. I'm sorry, that's just how it is, right? So we're going to talk about a very concerning issue that affects none other than the businessman Victor Daldama, but above all Spaniards. Because in the end, Aldama's cooperation with the justice system affects all Spaniards who want Pedro Sánchez's corruption rooted out of Spain. And pay close attention, because none other than the Attorney General, Teresa Peramato, is maneuvering to break this cooperation agreement between Victor Daldama and the justice system. Let's share this information on screen, as always. By the way, if you haven't done it yet, remember to subscribe to the Medidas Cautelares channel, which lately is starting to pick up the pace again after a few quieter months, so let's go for it. And we're already sharing the information directly on screen because I know you like us to get straight to the point. Here you have Victor Daldama at one of the entrances or exits of the Supreme Court, and be very careful with what's happening behind the scenes at the prosecutor's office. The Attorney General, Teresa Peramato, is maneuvering to sabotage the collaboration agreement between businessman Victor Daldama and the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office in the context of the Coldo scheme. The Supreme Court, as you all know, is holding the first trial on the corruption scheme this April. During the preliminary hearing, which took place in mid-February, the Chief Anti-Corruption Prosecutor Alejandro Luzon, who, by the way, is the one speaking on behalf of the prosecutor's office. In the Coldo case, the door was left open for Daldama not to go to prison after his confession. In its indictment before the trial, the prosecution, I recall, requested 7 years in prison for Daldama himself, after considering a mitigating factor for cooperating with justice. Compared to the 24 years in prison and 19.5 years respectively that it requested for the other two defendants who, as you know, are the former Minister of Transport, José Luis Ábalos, and his former advisor, Coldo Garcia. Well, the legal sources we have consulted at Libertad Digital and on Medidas Cautelares report that the Attorney General, Teresa Peramato, is pressuring the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, headed by Alejandro Luzon, to sabotage the cooperation agreement with justice that Daldama initiated with his lawyer, José Antonio Choclan, since he first testified about the scheme. Coldo in November 2024 before the head of the Central Investigative Court No. 2 of the National Court, Ismael Moreno. That statement by the businessman made possible his release from prison, which had been ordered by Judge Santiago Pedras in the context of the hydrocarbon scheme. I'm reminding you because there was much confusion then. Judge Pedras, who is investigating the hydrocarbon scheme at the National Court, orders the imprisonment of Victor Daldama. While Daldama is in prison, the businessman's lawyer, José Antonio Choclan, let's say, carries out negotiations with the prosecutor's office. They say they are going to start cooperating with the justice system to testify. And at that moment, that's when Victor Daldama, on that date in November 2024, is released from prison to testify at the National Court in the context of the Coldo case before the National Court judge, Ismael Moreno. In that famous testimony, Daldama spills everything, implicating everyone: Pedro Sánchez, Ábalos, Coldo, Santos Cerdán, Torres, basically everything that has been confirmed afterwards. And after that testimony by Daldama at the National Court about the Coldo case, Judge Pedras, from the hydrocarbons case, grants him provisional release. And that cooperation agreement with the justice system started right there at that moment. Well, Peramato is putting pressure on the anti-corruption unit, and now, more than ever, they say, the autonomy of the department led by Luzon must be upheld. There is a real danger that the Attorney General will put an end to this cooperation agreement to clean up corruption in Spain. It should be noted that the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office has always made it clear that no written cooperation agreement has been signed with Daldama. and that they are only investigating and evaluating all the information he has been revealing, which has been key to the investigation since the businessman began to cooperate. In other words, unlike American movies, there's no signed paper between Daldama and his lawyer Choklan saying what they'll do. Instead, they began talking and cooperating, and the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office will consider Daldama's statements when deciding on a reduced prison sentence request. The same sources consulted point out that the Attorney General wants to sabotage Daldama's cooperation, and this is the main reason. Because if his testimony and information are given credibility, it would mean admitting and acknowledging the corruption that directly affects the government and Pedro Sanchez's PSOE. But Peramato wants to avoid it at all costs, okay? I think this is very clear. That is, if Daldama reveals something huge, obviously it affects the government. Affecting Pedro Sanchez, and the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office then asked for a lighter prison sentence because he has cooperated with justice. The prosecutor's office is implicitly acknowledging, giving credibility to what Daldama is saying about Pedro Sanchez's government. Because in the end, Jose Luis Abalos, as we've always said, was Pedro Sanchez's right-hand man, in the party, in the government, and in everything, even personally. So this is the first trial over corruption in the Sanchez camp, not against Daldama's people, but against corruption in the Sanchez camp. Daldama's statement as a defendant in the Coldo case trial, initially scheduled for next April 29th, is going to be fundamental. So far, many of the witnesses who have appeared in the trial, which I am following every day, have been very evasive before the court, taking advantage of the fact that they are under investigation in other cases in the National Court. In this context, Daldama's words in the Supreme Court could be decisive for the conviction of Abalos and Coldo. Daldama's statement as a defendant is going to be key, which is initially set for April 29th. You already know that the trial schedule changes as the days go by. It can be moved up, postponed, and so on. Here you have a photograph of Teresa Peramato, Spain's Attorney General, who replaced Álvaro García Ortiz, and who is just as bad or even worse than Álvaro García Ortiz. Things always get worse. And what this woman is doing now is pressuring people to boycott and torpedo Daldama's deal with prosecutors. I also have to remind you that during her intervention at the preliminary hearing in the Coldo case in February, the chief anti-corruption prosecutor Alejandro Luzon referred to a possible reduction in the sentence request for Daldama. In these exact words, this is what Luzon said. That reward, that lesser sentence, is what Article 21 of the Penal Code requires. The discussion may be about whether that cooperation qualifies as a mitigating factor and whether it is a highly qualified one or not, but certainly before the trial begins, I don't think this was appropriate. That was what Luzon said. After Daldama's lawyer, Jose Antonio Choklan, brought up the possible reduction of the requested sentence for his client Daldama, the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office must determine if Daldama's cooperation is a qualified mitigating factor, reducing their sentence by 1 degree, or highly qualified, lowering it by up to 2 degrees. If the prosecutor's office reduces the sentence request by only 1 degree for the crimes of criminal organization and continued bribery for which he is being tried, Daldama, neither of the two crimes would be punished with more than 2 years, and therefore Daldama would not go to prison. However, if the Anti-Corruption Office lowers the sentence request for Daldama by even 2 degrees, it's possible that even the sum of both crimes would not exceed 2 years. And this is the extremely important, serious information that I am revealing to you exclusively on Medidas Cautelares. The Attorney General maneuvering to destroy Daldama's cooperation agreement with the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. Now more than ever, we need Daldama. We need Daldama so there will be convictions in the Supreme Court for the Coldo scheme, for Abalos and Coldo, and we also need Daldama to clean up Pedro Sanchez's corruption in Spain. And what if obviously Pedro Sanchez, through the Attorney General Peramato, is maneuvering to get rid of him? This cooperation agreement with the justice system would be bad news for all Spaniards. For all Spaniards, let's hope that the chief anti-corruption prosecutor Alejandro Luzon remains firm despite the pressure from prosecutor Teresa Peramato, and that the prison sentence reduction is agreed upon for Daldama if he cooperates with the justice system, and if he complies as he has been doing so far, once he testifies as a defendant in the trial at the Supreme Court about the Coldo case. In the coming days, I will give you more information about the statement that Victor Daldama is going to make at the Supreme Court. That's it for this edition of Medidas Cautelares. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, you know what to do. Give it a like, thumbs up, whatever you want to call it. Share the video with whoever you want. You can share it with your family, friends, colleagues, and of course leave your questions because you know I always answer them. By the way, I don't want to forget that in the last few days, another piece of information that we revealed here exclusively has come true. And it was that the UKO was already finalizing the report on the President of the Congress of Deputies, Francine Armengol, in the context of the Coldo case. And indeed, there haven't been any big surprises in that report. Not every UCO report can be a bombshell one after another. But the most important thing is that this UKO report demonstrates and proves the direct involvement of the current President of the Congress and former President of the Balearic Islands in the Coldo scheme, in the management of purchases with the company from the corrupt network Soluciones de Gestión. And I have to tell you that since I am following the Coldo scheme trial in the Supreme Court, there are many workers and officials from the Ministry of Transport, State Ports, and so on who are under investigation in the National Court for much less than what Francina Armengol has done. Or the Minister of Territorial Policy, Ángel Víctor Torres, when he was President of the Canary Islands, for much less. And if officials and workers from the Ministry of Transport or ADIF or whatever else are charged for having participated in the processing of those contracts, why aren't Francina Armengol and Ángel Víctor Torres charged as well, since they were also fully involved in the processing of those purchases? I have no explanation, and the only explanation is that there are different kinds of justice in Spain, justice that the powerful have and justice that those without power don't have. Anyway, let's hope this situation becomes clearer, and most importantly, as I always say, let's hope this information reaches everyone because information is power. See you soon.